Wow. Welcome to Targeted, the show for masculinity and success. And I'm your host, Atlas Altman, former military commander turned best-selling author, now bringing you a podcast that you can use for sharing stories from highly successful men so that you can figure it out for yourself. Welcome. This is Targeted. So I want to talk about your time as a pro MMA fighter.
Sure.
Tell me a story where you felt like this is where I need to be.
Yeah, probably almost from the get-go, like I said, when I first started judo, that I could tell right away that martial arts was, and I'd always wanted to do martial arts when I was younger.
Yeah.
But you had the taekwondo school, and I remember, kind of like one of my buddies trained over there, and, they were breaking boards and, different stuff, and they were doing katas, and, I was like, yeah, it looks cool, but, it just wasn't, it just didn't, have all the, bells and whistles that I was looking for. And so I knew that, but once I started judo and I had gotten into that, and then of course, just, watching the UFC and different things like that. And then not too long later, they were doing the development for the Ultimate Fighter show. And so that was starting. And that's when I finally was like, you know what, man, I think I'd like to get in there and do this, you know what I mean? And test myself.
Was that down in Tucson or?
No. So yeah, we were basically still living in Payson at that point.
Okay.
And so I was actually the first person to ever open an MMA school in Payson, Arizona.
Nice.
An MMA gym. I was the first, since it was, the name of it was PANKRATIon Martial Arts.
PANKRATIon, why? Why PANKRATIon?
So anyways, yeah, so it was, what's interesting is I really delved into the history of martial arts in general. And PANKRATIon is the martial art that the Greeks were using back in the day, and it was kind of the Roman and Greeks back then. And it was actually the martial art that Alexander the Great's armies were practicing.
Really? So it was the first combatives.
Exactly. Well, obviously there's statues and hieroglyphics of guys with cauliflower ears and stuff that go back way, whatever, how many hundreds of years or thousands of years BC.
Yeah.
So we know martial arts and fighting have been around for a long time, probably since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
But you can date back even before the Asian martial arts. A lot of people believe PANKRATIon was a precursor to that. So Alexander the Great's general at the time, his name was Dioxippus, and he was a very known general at the time, but he was a 7-time PANKRATIon champion in the Olympics. And so he was, so the thing, these guys had basically conquered the whole, hemisphere over there. At that point, and I think a huge reason for it is they were monsters in the battlefield, when they had their weapons, but if it went hand to hand, they could smoke you that way too. They absolutely could. And so a lot of that was actually happening in the Colosseums. When you watch Gladiator and different things like that, you always think of, it was people, with weapons, and a lot of times it was, but they would have hand to hand combat, matches too. And so back in the day, instead of tapping out, you would just raise your hand. That was how you would yield, basically. And so, it was, fighting in a coliseum or in a cage, they were very similar. It was happening back then too.
Yeah.
Well, what happened is the last conquest with Alexander the Great's army was the conquest of India. And that was actually where he ended up dying and passed away at that point. Well, a lot of his army, they didn't want to come all the way back to home at that point. They had been traveling and, and fighting and, beating all these these people in these places. And a lot of them were just like, you know what, we're just going to they took up wives and they just stayed there in India.
Yeah.
And so a lot of historians think that's where the Asian martial arts could have started, is a lot of those, they were started to teach the PANKRATIon over there, and it entered into the, more of that area of the world. And so anyways, for me, it was like, this is the foundation. And so PANKRATIon literally translates as all powers or all forms of fighting.
Wow.
Right. And so I was just like, dude, that's a cool name. And that's kind of like, what I want, to teach people.
Yeah.
And so that was my first gym, was called PANKRATIon Martial Arts, and we abbreviated it PMA, And so anyways, that was kind of where the whole, fighting and mixed martial arts thing came in, And so, that was the foundation. So opened up the gym in Payson. And then I actually was starting to train fighters at that point. And so then I had guys that we eventually were so high level that I went down and coached them in Brazil. So, yeah. So first time I went down was Fortaleza, and then the next time was Belo Horizonte.
Okay.
But so I've been down to Brazil to even coach fighters, and I was actually the coach for the USA team. So what they wanted is they kind of bring us down as lambs to the slaughter a little bit, but it was the USA team versus Brazil.
Oh wow!
And it was called, the promotion was called Judo Brazil. And so had a couple guys that we were on the card, and we brought down to fight there. But when I first started to get into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it was with Gustavo Dantas. And he was, like I said, he was one of the first guys that kind of came over from Brazil, from Rio. And he was a black belt under Andre Pederneiras, who's, gosh, Andre's got hundreds of black belts under him. Yeah. Notables, BJ Penn, Mark Lehman, Jose Aldo. The list just goes on and on and on. Some of the most notable, black belts in the world are from his lineage, and Gustavo being one of them. But I used to have Gustavo come up a lot to do seminars in Payson and stuff when we were really trying to incorporate more of the pure style of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu into what we had going on too. So trained with him for quite a while as well, you know, and so basically but it was his professor Andre that was kind of his promotion was Judo Brazil over there, and so it was kind of, we got linked up through him, like, hey, I know you have some fighters, would you be interested in coming down and fighting in Brazil? And of course, when I asked my guys, they were like, oh heck yeah, that's an opportunity of a lifetime. We're getting paid. We're pro fighters now. It was one of those things where MMA was still kind of at its infancy. You know what I mean? And so anyways, that's kind of how that whole thing started, with me getting into the fighting and whatnot. And I was training other guys, but at the same time, I was kind of gearing myself up to fight too. Yeah. And I knew that the reason why I wanted to fight more than anything else was obviously to test myself, but I wanted to have the experience. If I was going to be a coach, I had to knew what it was like to feel, to what it felt like to get in there, to compete, to be a fighter. You know what I mean? So that's my thing and don't get me wrong, I mean, you could have a lot of knowledge and you could coach people and you could, but if you don't have the real,
if you don't hate the experience, it doesn't matter.
That's the thing, is I wanted to have the hands-on. I wanted to know that, hey, I know how you feel right now. I've been there. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so that was the bigger part of it. It was not just testing myself, or, I wasn't trying to be the next UFC champion. That really wasn't on my goals. I wanted to be the best coach in the world. That was really what I wanted to be, is the best coach. But I knew I couldn't be the best coach unless I'd had the experience first. And so that was really kind of how I got into it.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to bring you back to the question.
Sure.
When you're in the pro, when you're being paid to fight.
Yes.
When did you have that feeling like, I've made it to where I want to be right now?
Well, yeah, and again, it wasn't that, I was trying to be, a high level MMA.
You're just trying to be the best coach you can be.
Yep. But I remember, obviously, it's probably after one of my victories when I fought in Mexico.
Okay.
Went down there and
where at Mexico did you go?
Rocky Point. So just over the border.
Yeah, still.
So my cousin Chad that trained with was one of Don's training partners. Him and his dad wanted to do their own promotion.
Yeah.
And they called it Full Moon Fighting. And man, we actually had some major names on that card. For a lot of former UFC fighters that went on from there to later on fought in the UFC.
Wow.
A lot of names I could probably start rattling off, but anyways, I had a fight down there and ended up winning second round via rear naked choke. And but I remember after that victory, it was like, wow, dude, this is a goal that I had set.
Yeah.
I got in there, I did it, I won. Yeah. It was a wonderful feeling, but to know that, hey, that's my first step on my road to where I'm trying to get. You know what I mean? And so obviously a great feeling when you win, and like many other guys, the highs are the highs and the lows are the lows. And I tell you what, when you win, it's like you're on cloud nine. You're walking on, you're on top of the world.
For how long though? For how long?
Yeah.
before you get the urge to be like,
not,
I got to do
very
this
long,
again.
Not very long, right? But when you lose, it's the whole nother, it's the other end of that completely. It's like, you just feel like you're trash, like I suck, and, am I ever going to amount to anything? It's one of those things. And so it's like, when you lose, it can also make or break you, you know what I mean? And that's why we say you either win or you learn, right? And so losing is always a learning process, you know what I mean? And so you take what you can from it and you build upon it. But I tell you what, man, it
doesn't feel good whenever
it
you
doesn't
lose.
It doesn't feel good. And everybody wants to win. But unfortunately, there's only two, and there can only be one, right?
Right.
So someone has to win and someone has to lose. And sometimes it's you that wins, and sometimes it's not you. And, a lot of guys that are undefeated in combat sports, whether it's jiu-jitsu or MMA or whatever it is, they're undefeated or wherever. So I usually say, well, they haven't fought enough. They haven't fought enough then. Because if you fight for a long time or you compete for a long time, you're going to lose at some point. And that's just how it is, and that's...
It's the system.
Exactly.
It's a meritocracy.
For sure.
Everyone gets older.
Yep.
In combat, I'm like, everyone sleeps. So... you have to sleep sometime. That is and no matter how strong you are, you're going to go down.
Yep.
And that's when you learn where your limit is, usually. Yeah.
And no matter how tough you are, there's always someone else out there that can kick your ass.
Yeah. Everyone has bad days, too.
Yes, absolutely.
So even if you're the best, you could have a terrible day that day.
Yep.
And you're not the best today.
Yep. And that's why we say sometimes you're the hammer, sometimes you're the nail. Right. And it's literally like that. And I'll tell my students the same thing. Sometimes you'll walk out of the gym kind of with that strut, like, damn, man, when you had a good day, right? And like, dang, I'm pretty good. And some days you walk out with your head hung like, man, I suck, man. And I remember there was days like that, even with my professor, Professor Jay Pages. I remember one instance in particular when I was a brown belt and I went to train over at his academy, and I'll even name the guy, Freddie Lopez, was training with him, and he's, I believe he's still a police officer with Tempe PD. But he was a blue belt at the time, 4-stripe blue belt, and went with him, and this dude literally just like manhandled me for 5 minutes. Like, and I was just like, what in the world? Like, I'm 2 ranks up from this guy.
Yeah.
And I felt like, we were grappling with the gi, and I felt like I was in a straitjacket the whole time. Just like
Couldn't
what
move.
the heck, man? And I remember leaving that training session that day, and I literally messaged Jay after I had left, and I was like, man, I mean, I don't know what was going on with me. I had a crap day.
Yeah.
You're kind of apologizing, like, I know I'm better than that. I'm sorry that you saw that, or, whatever. And his reply back was awesome. And it was just like, oh no, he's like, everybody's got their good days. Everybody's got their bad days. And some guys are just built to beat you up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're just like your kryptonite.
That's
and
so
one of the best advice he ever gave me was this. And it said, you have to be somebody that can lose and forget about it right away. And what the analogy he gave me was how many times does a professional baseball team play in a season? Like hundreds of games, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times they'll be playing a game 3-4 days in a row, back to back to back to back.
Yeah.
They get their asses whooped, 10-0 one day. What are they going to do? Are they going to remember that and take it into the next game? Or do they have to forget about that, start it with a clean slate, right? And now we're off to the next game, right? And that's what he told me, is like, you got to be able to forget about this, forget that it ever happened. Tomorrow's a new day, and that was really the best advice, that I could have had, is that, what, I'm going to forget about it quick. And it was what it was, you know what I mean? And, but that definitely taught me a lesson there for sure.
I mean, when you're younger, you dwell on those things. Like people care. They don't. People care about themselves. Yep. So, like, even if they were on the winning side of that, they forgot that they won.
Yep.
It's a mind game.
For sure.
But I love how you put it. Like, you've dropped a lot of names.
Yep.
And everyone who's successful does this. So I'm going to ask you the same question that I always ask. How important are the people around you to your success?
Oh, huge. I mean, it couldn't be, any explained any better. You know what I mean? It's, definitely. I mean, like I said, I feel like definitely have put myself in a very strong community, and the martial arts community in itself is an amazing community. you know, in any aspect, whether it's just a kickboxing or the, you know, MMA or the jiu-jitsu part of it or anything, but anything in whole, it's one of the stronger, more supportive communities that you ever could be a part of. And what's so interesting about it is it doesn't matter what profession you are, what religion you are, what, you know, political party you belong to, anything. We all are wearing these uniforms, these gis, right? Or, you know, I'm speaking more about, you know, jiu-jitsu now in general. But that was always one thing that I appreciated about it is you had a doctor over here training with a guy that was flipping burgers at McDonald's. And the McDonald's guy is whooping the doctor, right? Or the, you know, the stoners are training with the cops. You know what I mean? It was just like, and it was one of those times, you know, where there's cohesiveness there that you couldn't explain, and it didn't matter what walk of life you came from. Everybody had unity because we were all training martial arts. You know what I mean? And there wasn't, you know, it didn't matter how you were dressed because we're all dressed in the same thing. The only thing that was differentiating us was the colors of our belts. You know what I mean? And that's another thing I loved about, you know, martial arts in general is that everybody was equals. You know what I mean? You know, obviously depending on your rank, but it didn't really matter who you were or what you were in life. We supported each other because we all did we all had this common goal, and that was to get better at whatever martial art we were practicing. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Pretty cool.
One level deeper.
Sure.
On private lessons.
Yes.
I know you give private lessons.
Yes.
I see you giving private lessons.
Yep.
And I see these people leveling up and they get a great session with you. I mean, they all rave about you. So why do you do private lessons? Like what's the allure for you as a coach to do private lessons? Because you don't have to.
Yeah, totally. It's something that I have done other times, and then other times was too busy. And so kind of like, and you'll see different, you know, professors or coaches kind of go through times where their schedule kind of clears up a bit. They're like, hey, I'm actually back to teaching some private lessons again. I think the reason why is because I did privates when I first started with Gustavo. I would go, you know, at the time I lived in Payson, and I would drive down to the Valley because that was the closest Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school that wasn't judo. And I would, my buddy lived down here. And so I would go in and I would train the night session. I would spend the night at his house, wake up first thing in the morning, go to the early morning session. And then I loved to shop at Trader Joe's, and we didn't have Trader Joe's in Payson. So I would go shopping afterwards for all the good food. And then I would take it all home back to Payson. And I did that twice a week for a long time, I think it was many months or even a year or two. And I was going through fire school at the same time to be a firefighter. But that was the thing, is it was just like, the one-on-one, when you have that one-on-one, there's a deeper understanding of the art that you could ever have. You know what I mean? And so again, we're not big on people like you have to do private lessons. It's something that obviously a person decides if they want to do it.
I've never heard you push it, you know.
Exactly.
Well, I don't think you would have time if you did, honestly.
Exactly. You know, and so it's something we don't push. But for those that want to do it, I mean, I know for me, I would have to credit at probably at least 50% of my jiu-jitsu game to those private lessons back in the day. A lot of it came from that. There's something that you get with that one-on-one instruction that you just don't get in a regular class. And it's, it's like in school, you're in a big class with a lot of different peers, or you have a private tutor that comes over and teaches you, right? You're probably going to have a better understanding because you get that one-on-one with your coach, or your teacher. And so it's something that I always wanted to provide, because it was something that was such a big deal in my life, because it helped me so much get better quicker. And I saw how much I improved in leaps and bounds, and how quick I did from the one-on-one instruction instead of just going to classes. And so you get a lot of different people. Some people are uncomfortable with the class setting. You know what I mean? Some people just have a lot of, maybe confidence issues or anxiety or whatever it is, being around a lot of other people, and they're more comfortable with just that one-on-one. You know what I mean? Or sometimes they'll graduate from having the one-on-one and then they'll go into the classes. I've seen that happen a lot of times too, and you kind of get them used to it and you kind of warm them up to it. You know what I mean? But some people prefer to just do one-on-one. You know what I mean? And so whatever is good for you, whatever is comfortable for you, whatever makes you happy. You know what I mean? That's kind of where I'm at with private lessons. If there's something that you want to know or something that I can teach you, I'm happy to do it in that setting. Yeah. You know what I mean? And in other words, everyone's got a different level of comfort, of comfort, when it comes to taking classes or learning something new, and so, but definitely, I teach privates, and I think it's a huge tool in improving your game and getting better. For sure. Absolutely. Something that we don't want to push, that we don't, like you said.
You don't.
But I've seen it. But
we're
here to do it for sure.
So hour session, half hour session, how do you do that?
A lot of times, great question. I do hour sessions with adults and I do half an hours with kids.
Okay.
It seems like obviously kids have a little bit less of an attention span.
Yeah.
And so I like to keep them a little bit shorter with the kids. And so we do usually half an hour sessions with kids, and then the adults will do the full hour.
Yeah, I was asked, the reason why I asked that question is because I see the kids winning the competitions whenever they do a competition and they have private lessons.
Yeah.
There's a major outcome there.
Sure.
But I was like, an hour with a kid.
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to be a lot.
It can be, yes.
So a half hour thank you.
Yes.
That makes a lot more sense.
Yes.
I was like, well, how does this kid is paying attention for an hour?
Yeah. And it definitely can be harder. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing I like to do with the kids too, and it's not all the time, and it's availability, of course. But if there's another child that's close to their same age and we do a group private, that's something that's awesome too, because as a coach, you can kind of stand back and see things from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And obviously kids are not the size of an adult. And so it's easier for them to learn with somebody more their size.
That's good.
When my son was younger, I used to make him come along a lot of the time, and I'd give him a little cut of the money, that we get from the privates, and he would kind of be the partner.
Yeah.
Especially when we did.
So you could see.
Exactly. Private lessons. So, that's, sometimes we'll still do that. My wife does the same thing when she does privates, they'll do like a group private, in other words, where, but obviously, if no one's available, I've been, again, teaching kids for over 20 years. I'm very comfortable with it. So there's a lot of things I can still teach them even in a one-on-one, if it's just me and them too. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of different ways that we can, switch it up too.
Thank you for explaining that. You do judo too, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
So judo, jiu-jitsu, no gi, which is no uniform for those who may not know. Yep. So the biggest thing that I pull out of the martial arts community is I see these men and women sometimes. I see them around the community. And if something bad were to happen, like God forbid, I'm glad they're there.
Yeah.
I'd rather see them than somebody who's turning red-faced and going red or whatever it is that someone who doesn't know what they're doing. Because like the new kids coming into the gym are the dangerous ones that I'm like,
absolutely.
I don't think you realize you can hurt somebody.
Yeah.
Because you don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't want you to help me if you don't know anything.
Yeah.
So I see a big part there. But I'm going to pull away from that.
Sure.
We're going to end this with a discussion that I've seen on your social media.
Sure.
It's your dogs, man.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So talk about your dogs. Why do you have dogs?
Yeah.
Like, what's the big thing with dogs?
So here's the funny thing. I grew up again in Payson, Arizona. I was the oldest kid in my family. Yep. So I grew up, I think we had about eight acres of land when I was growing up, and we had all kinds of animals. We had goats, chickens, dogs, cats, the list goes on, right? And so who was responsible for feeding them and taking care of them? A lot of the time, me.
Yeah.
And so it was funny, for a lot of time after I was an adult, I didn't want animals because I was kind of burned out and taking care of animals all the time.
How long did that last?
It didn't last for too long. I think we ended up having a cat first for a while and whatnot. Yeah. But finally, we kind of got to the stage, and it was my sister had gotten a Chihuahua, and we went on a trip somewhere, and her dog was still a puppy at the time, but I remember thinking like, oh, it's a sweet little dog, or whatever. And I think my kids would probably like to have a dog around the house, and so I started looking around, and I found somebody who was selling a Chihuahua or whatever, and so we went and picked it up. Little did I know they don't have the greatest temperaments for kids or for anyone else. And so she was a good little dog, but she was, obviously one of those dogs that if you got in her face, she'd bite you, or she had a vicious, side too. And so probably not the best dog that I could have got for a younger family at the time. But sad story, she ended up getting into a Colorado river toad, or one of the poisonous toads we have out here. Yeah. And she died. Ugh. She died from it. And it's one of those things when dogs, eat, it's kind of like a hallucinogen for them when the dogs, lick the toad. And because they secrete off of their back, the back, that poison, and so basically, a lot of times you can wash the dog's mouth out, and they'll kind of come down off the high and they'll return to normal again. But she was a little Chihuahua, so I think what it was is she was a little dog and she just had a big dose of poison, and anyway, she ended up passing away. And so we were obviously sad about that. So right away, I was looking into getting another dog, and so. Anyways, a buddy of mine had just picked up a pup from the neighbors that had a litter. Yeah. And so he sent me a picture of, well, here they got this boy dog that's still here or whatever, and sent me a picture, and I showed my wife, and she's like, "Oh my God, I'm in love already. Let's go pick him up." Yeah. So we went to go get the one dog. And it turned into my wife seeing the sister dog too. And so we're supposed to go get one, and we ended up bringing back both. Yes, so we had two dogs, right? The brother and the sister. So we have Rowdy, which I named after Ronda Rousey, Ronda Rousey, because I was a huge Ronda Rousey fan back in the day, especially being a judoka, right? And so Rowdy and Honey. And so those were our two dogs.
Why Honey?
Just because she was sweet, I guess. She was the typical. Yeah. She was a nice dog or whatever. Yep. So that's the two dogs that we had first. And then when my daughter, after the kidney transplant, after we had the transplant, she was recovering at my house. Okay. Obviously, kind of living at her house at that point. And she had a little dog named Milo. Okay. And so obviously her dog came over too and was living with us. So we had 3 dogs at the time. And then when she ended up recovering and was going to move out into her own place, they didn't allow pets. And so it was a little bit of an issue. So I just told her, I was like, "Hey, your dog's welcome to stay at our house. We'll adopt her." We love at that. And I had become quite fond, at this point to her anyway. And so I was like, "I have no problem with her staying. If you want to just keep her here, you can come see her anytime you want. Yeah. She's happy here. She's got other dogs to play with." And it was one of those things with her and her boyfriend, work a lot. And so, she would be alone at the house with no other dogs to play with. And so anyway, so she let us basically kind of have, adopt the dog. She gave her to us, type thing. And obviously she's still Krista's dog too. But, we started not calling her Milo anymore. We started calling her Teeny because she's a small dog. And so now we don't even call her Milo anymore. Her name is Teeny.
Yeah, she comes.
And so, So anyways, that's how that's the story with my dogs. I'm a dog lover and whatnot. But so that's how we came to have 3 dogs now. So anyway. Yeah.
No, I love it, man. Dogs are amazing. I love dogs. Yeah. So thank you for that.
For sure. Yes.
Last question.
Yep.
In your experience, in your life, you've amassed a lot of success. You've coached a lot of winners. I've seen it personally. You've changed lives. What is the one thing you would tell yourself, your younger self, to kind of advance the ball, give you good advice? What would you go back in time and tell yourself if you could do that?
Like as far as like being like a
advice,
coach?
Anything that you wanted, anything that would help a younger you, what would it be?
I would say, be patient is an attribute I've struggled with for a long time. And I think I'm finally getting a little bit better as I get older with it, is to be patient, not only with other people, but myself, you know what I mean? Mm. And a lot of the times when, we kind of sit back and see how something might develop, it might turn out a lot better. In martial arts in general, sometimes we're in positions that are pretty hairy, and sometimes we'll feel like we need to make a move really quick. Yeah. But when we do that, we find ourselves in an even worse position. And so sometimes it's better to be patient and let that time pass, and then, I'll be able to make that move and have success with it. I find that in life it's very similar, you know what I mean? And when I've been more patient, and kind of, just kind of see how things will turn out. It seems like things have turned out for the better in a lot of ways. And, so I think that that's one of the biggest, advices I might give my younger self is that, hey, don't sweat the small stuff, be patient, see how things will work out. And a lot of the times they'll work out for the best,
Yeah, that's great advice. I didn't even process that until you just said that. I was like, I would learn a lot I still would learn a lot from patience. Patience is hard.
Yeah, it is.
It's a lifelong game, man.
That is the truth. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Professor Wyatt
yes.
Shepherd, for coming over. I'm going to give you a gift. This is from Wounded Warrior Foundation. It is something that I got customized from them. It's a multi-tool. If you're familiar with Swiss Army knives of sorts. This one is it's a useful tool. It has a glass breaker.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So you can bring it on a plane as a weapon system.
Nice.
Then you have multi-tool, screwdriver. This spring comes out. You can clean your phones out or whatever you might need for that. On the other side is a Coke bottle opener and a pen.
Nice.
And all of that has targeted on there. So I'm going to give you that as for being a guest.
I love
and
it.
Say thank you.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
I'll shake your hand.
Yes, sir.
And thank you for all the knowledge you just dropped here on Targeted.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it, man. We've been talking about this for a while, and it's good to have you in the studio. I appreciate the time.
Yeah.
I know you don't have very much of it, so thank you for sharing it with us.
You're welcome. Glad to finally get over here and do it for sure. Thank you.
Awesome. And for the rest of you, stay tuned. We got another banger coming up. Wyatt dropped some great things, but I'm going to tell you, we have more of him in short form that you're going to absolutely love. Pairing him with some of his partners, and we have more episodes coming up. So stay tuned. Stay targeted.
Awesome. Sweet, man.
Stay with us as we stay on target with another awesome episode coming up next. We'll see you there. And subscribe to Targeted now. As an ambassador to buckedup.com, I get to give you our special discount. That's Atlas25 when you go to buckedup.com to get that special discount. Only for our listeners, Atlas25. Go to buckedup.com now.